Hello folks, hope you're having a good day today. Hey, today I want to take a look at the 10th story that I have set aside for you in my Cthulhu Mythos October that I've set aside, where I'm doing an accelerated number of stories, one story for you every other day. And I'm going to take another look at Frank Belknap Long. This time we're taking a look at his book, his work, The Space Eaters, and so forth. And it's also published in some of it's anthologized in a few places here and there. For you too. So we'll be taking a look at that here in a little bit, and getting a feel for what it does. And it's written a few years later after the Hounds of Tindalos, which we just looked at. Now, as a reminder, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking aside the month of October for you, doing a story every other day in order to kind of explore and take a deep dive into a number of stories that were sort of written in the Cthulhu Mythos, both then and now. And so we're going to be taking a look at a variety of stories. I spent the first 6 stories taking a look at various stories by H.P. Lovecraft, who creates the Cthulhu Mythos, and then a number of other people who are writing in it. I also have my Happy Halloween tie for you guys too, in order to knock these out. I'm actually just spending one day, and I'm just hitting the pause button every few stories, and then every story, and then going and doing some research on the next one. I'm probably just going to spend like 10 or 12 hours in one day. I've already spent 3 today, 10 stories in, so I'll probably have another couple of weeks to go. So anyway, but again, my goal here is to kind of give you a feel for the Cthulhu Mythos, what it's doing, and so forth. It's because, again, this is really the first major time that horror is pushed aside, past its normal sort of mundane. Am I going to survive this ghost or this haunting, or this person's trying to kill me, or stalking me down the street, or am I going, or a vampire or something like that, or am I going, am I going to live or die into this big giant? This whole world doesn't care about anybody. We all, as humans, are meaningless, meaningless things. And if we actually realize just how bad the world was and all the nasty things that are happening right out there, we would all go crazy and insane. And so forth. There's this cosmic indifference to us, and this knowledge that man was not meant to know, that are key parts of the mythos. But they're different here. And so that's one of the reasons why I kind of like taking the Space Eaters, probably as one of my earlier ones, because the Space Eaters was written at the same time of Lovecraft. It is a part of the mythos. It's reincorporated by Lovecraft and so forth. So I do think but I don't think it's a good story for some reasons, although it's great for others. I mean, it's definitely a fun story. He definitely understands the mythos and so forth. But let's take a look at Frank Belknap Long. Now, in short, just as a reminder, because I've already talked more about his bio in the last video where I take a look at him for the first time. But basically, he's a chameleon who wrote tons and tons of things. He started writing during the pulp era, wrote hundreds of stories in the pulp era, survived, moved to comics, wrote tons of comics for big name comics like Green Lantern and Captain Marvel. Then he moved over and he was writing novels and so forth. So he was a very big writer for about 50, 60 years, and he moved from genres to different times and survived different eras. He's very much a chameleon, one of the few people that actually survived the pulp era and the death thereof, and continued to write and find venues for his writing. So good job to him. And again, the story we're going to be taking a look at here was still kind of early in his career. I actually don't think it's as good as Hounds of Tindalos, which was one of the first published stories. By now he's published a few. And he's a couple of years into his career, but there are some great things about it. So we're taking a look at it. The Space Eaters. It's about 20 pages long in my collection here of the early Long. We can take a look at some of his stories and such. So it'll probably take you about a half hour, 45 minutes to read it if it's the first time reading it. But basically, there's going to have 2 characters in it. One character is named Howard, who surprisingly, not surprisingly, seems a lot like Howard Phillips Lovecraft, a.k.a. Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. And the other one, who definitely feels more like a Frank, like the actual narrator Long, who's writing the story, and our main point of view character. And basically, our 2 characters are going to be having a conversation about horror and the nature of horror. They're both writers of horror and so forth. And Howard's going to be talking about how it's really difficult to write horror well because you have to have experienced it. He's looking for some great horror stories to write and tell, and so forth. And it's difficult to kind of have a really strong horror story where it resonates with people and so forth. And it's coming more difficult with the whole sort of fleshness. Then they're going to come across a guy named Wells who's going to run across him and so forth. He says he's being chased by something, and he says he was hit by something from the sky. He thought that it was like a liver or an organ or something like that, but when he looked up, he couldn't see anything that was in the sky or anything else like that, and so forth. So they bring him inside, take a look at him, talk to him, and so forth. And then after they do, and then at first Howard, the H.P. Lovecraft character, is like, "This is great. This is exactly what I was looking for a story, and it happened to you." It's pretty annoying. And then as he realizes that this guy's like it's serious and it's actually happening, he starts to sort of get more serious too with his sort of responses and helping out the person. Wells heads on out, and so now our two writers are left to talk about things, have conversations about things. Wells will come back later on, and he's a little crazy and so forth. He's trying to change a little bit into his character and so forth. They'll bring in a doctor to take a look at him. The doctor's going to open him up, open up his head, and take a look at something that's inside his head, and sews it right back up without doing any work, and says, nope, he's marked. And he will not, he's been marked. They're going to try to find him by whoever tried to mark him and so forth. And so he leaves Wells in the room to die. And so forth. The rest of them will head on out and such. And then basically what's going to happen is over the rest of the story, and I'm actually going to give you the whole full review, only in little bits, because it's really important to my review of the story to give you the full synopsis. So in this case, a little bit of spoilers. I'm going to give you a basic view of how it's going to end up, because I can't review this story without doing it in this case. It's an important part of that. So he's going to end up, these two characters are going to end up kind of trying to leave the area and so forth. They're going to see some things that are happening. Things are burning down. Things are emerging from the woods and so forth, and trying to chase them as they flee and so forth. And basically what's going to end up happening is that Long and Howard are going to basically use signs of the cross and so forth, and in order to save themselves and keep the bad guys from these dark space eaters from coming out and taking them out and so forth. And then that's kind of the end of the story. And now I'll kind of leave you there, put a coda on that. All right, now here's kind of my review thereof. Now here are a couple of issues that I have with the story. But before I go into the issues, I like to give you the good stuff. I think the story is well paced. I think that this is actually better paced than The Hounds of Tindalos. I think that's one of the areas that Belknap Long has improved. I think his writing style has gotten better since his first styles too, so I think this is definitely a better written story. I also think that he spends his extra pages well. It's about like 50% longer than the first story that we looked at last couple days ago. He uses that time well. He understands characters. He also has a great idea of the wrongness of the Cthulhu Mythos, the characters therein, and so forth, and how wrong it feels when they start to encounter some of these things. The description of Wells, the description of the various scenes, they're very well done. And he definitely feels like a Mythos story. So great stuff all around when it comes to that. So my applauds. But I have three major issues with the story. The first, so two plot issues and then a final a genre feel to it. The first plot issue I have with it is that they are describing horror stories, and when they just come across a horror story, I find that to be a little unbelievable as a plot point. Now, if Long had described it away by saying that they happened to be near something while they were talking about it, made it come true or something like that, that's fine. That's all I would need. Just something to hand wave and saying, hey, I know this is a plot point, but a plot hole, here's what actually happened, right? Your guys is talking, and if you guys had been talking about something else, that would have happened instead. Or something. You know, give me something to hang my hat on that says, okay, this is what's actually happening, and that shows that you realize this is a plot hole in your story. So that's my first issue with it. My second issue with it is another plot hole that happens a little bit later. That's with the doctor. The doctor opens up Wells's head, sees that there's been, and then sews it back up and says, there's this mark here, and so forth, and just immediately assesses what's happening and then leaves. How would a doctor, who basically is like a 1 or 2 page character, know these things? Right? You need to flesh out that doctor's character, or give me some reason the doctor would know this. Did you call instead of a normal doctor? Because this is just a medical doctor. Maybe a doctor of the occult who would have known these sorts of things. Kind of like a Van Helsing from Dracula, who already knows this stuff and can kind of bring you up to speed on it. That would have been fine. Do that. But to just have a normal medical doctor who just notices and without any explanation at all can diagnose these things and what's going to happen, no, that's just... Come on. And then my final issue with the story is more of the feel. There is a sense of good versus evil. There is a Christianization of the mythos of I can give the sign of the sign, and these dark ones, these bad guys aren't going to attack me, and so forth. And again, the doctor feels more like a Helsing than an actual doctor. I'm showing signs off. This is more of a Dracula than it is more of a Cthulhu Mythos story in some of these beats, and so forth. And I don't think that the Christianization of the mythos that happens here was one. And this is also another example of good versus evil. in the mythos that's happening early. Now again, I also gave you the Dunwich Horror third when I did my Cthulhu Mythos works by Lovecraft. So you can see that Lovecraft also has a good versus evil and good wins story too. So that does happen. Normally, you're going to get, people have died, bad guys survive, Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu's still out there, he just now under the water again, shadow over Innsmouth, even though the feds came and tried to torpedo the area, the deep ones lived, and so forth, and were barely slowed down at all. The good guys try to do something, but they die, they convert to the bad guys, or they go mad, right? But the bad guys always live; they're always surviving, and so forth. That is a key part, and this is, and this story doesn't have that with the whole Christianization and so forth. The good guys survive; we're able to not have to, So it's got that feel to it. So it's more of a good versus evil than I would typically want from my Generation 1 stories that are set in the Cthulhu Mythos at the same time of Lovecraft while he's still alive. And he's bringing them into his stories and vice versa. So I'm not a super fan of that. But again, I do like the fact, again, it's got good feels, good pacing, good descriptions of the scenes and so forth. And it's not the longest story at 20 pages. There are stories that I think have bigger issues that are twice as long as this one is. So I do enjoy it, I think, for what it's worth. I would also recommend just going to it with eyes wide open, that this is a sort of good versus evil Draculization. It almost feels like a Draculization and so forth of the genre, and so kind of go into it with an eyes wide open sort of style. But it's fine. Again, it's well written and so forth. So I'm handing on over to you now. Now I'm actually going to leave Frank Belknap Long. I'm actually going to be turning to some other writers for my next few stories and so forth. But I do want you to know that he does have. He's a name out there. He's done some stuff. Feel free to explore him. Check him out. He's done a lot of stuff. And he was a big chameleon during his time. So, all right, and there you are. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Did you agree or disagree with anything in my video or in the story that he wrote, Space Eaters? Maybe you liked it a lot better than I did. Maybe you disliked it a whole lot more than I did. I'm sorry, and I'm happy to engage with either of those two in the comments below. Also, hey, if you watch this video all the way to the end and you liked it, there's no reason not to hit that subscribe button. I do a whole lot of these sort of classics of fantasy, science fiction, and horror that we've either forgotten about or never knew about. And I sort of like to unpack those for you guys here. So if you like this, there's no reason not to check it out. Also, hey, if you watch this video all the way to the end, thank you so much. We all have busy days and busy lives. So the fact that you spent this time with me, that's something very humbling, and I do appreciate that. So thanks again.